Ladies and gentlemen, the background to this year's summit keynote session was that we were looking around for someone of global stature who could help us think through many of the issues that the world is undergoing today. And then, of course, there was the Trump administration getting its house in order and putting all its people in place. And we couldn't find that one person who could give us a encyclopedic view of all that's happened. And as you heard in the opening keynote, that Rosie has been there since the Obama administration. She worked across the aisle on both sides and has been the secret weapon, the person who actually gets the work done while the rest of us were reading the newspapers. And since you are very much a part of the bipartisan, caucus, as well as leading the America 2020. 250 anniversary. That's amazing. And here's the woman who is going to make America attractive to the rest of the world at a time when it doesn't look very attractive.
So, look, it is an exciting time for the world overall. And what I love, if you would have asked me 15 years ago, would I be doing what I'm doing today? My background's in real estate finance. So to be asked by our country to take the lead on planning the nation's and perhaps the world's biggest celebration in 2026, there's not like a playbook you could take off the shelf and say, here's how you put on this big celebration. It doesn't exist. But for me, I mean, the privilege, right? The privilege of being able to serve in a bipartisan approach, knowing that we are the oldest democracy in the world and knowing that the eyes of the world are going to be watching what's going to be happening in the US in such a short amount of time. I mean, I was on this panel at the Milken Global Conference last year with Gianni Infantino, the head of FIFA, along with Janet Evans and Lindsey Vonn, gold medalists, talking about the intersection of these three historical milestones, all happening in the US in a short amount of time. So next year it's the 250th, it's the World Cup, mostly in the US, and then 2 short years later is the Olympics in Los Angeles. Billions of people are going to be watching what's happening in the US in those 2 very short years. And again, I get another front row seat. So for me to wear this hat of being bipartisan, all partisan, nonpartisan, I see the world with a very practical lens. I actually don't like politics at all. And I think that's why, I'm assuming, that's why I get asked back to do these activities, because I don't let politics enter any of it. And that's the only way, in my opinion, you could actually get work done. I mean, strangely enough, ready for this? I was a student leader in 1986 for Harvard's 350th anniversary. It's like it was my fate.
It keeps coming back.
It was my fate, and no one knows that. It's not like it's on my resume. So again, I consider it a privilege to serve my country. This is now, I guess, technically my 4th tour of duty. I don't know why I keep getting asked, other than, again, I try to get something done.
And we've got so much to talk about on that front. But let me conceptualize the time that we have for this morning, because we could take this conversation in many different directions, and we have AI at the back of our minds, that we need to add into the scope. Right now, all of the world is concerned about how trade would evolve. And given the current administration's position on trade, the negotiations that are underway, the multilateral programs that are taking shape in other parts of the world, the fact that the world is no longer a monopolar world, it's not even a bipolar. There are many different centers of gravity that are evolving. While our minds on trade, the U.S. Single biggest strength is its role in capital. In fact, capital flows are multiple the size of trade. And then there is another one aspect that I'd like to bring into the conversation, which is financial infrastructure. There was a time when the US was a big exporter of financial infrastructure. I remember in the 80s, the whole idea under the Clinton administration was to export American banking system to the rest of the world, wanting to influence the global financial infrastructure, and then finding out that the rest of the world has grown up, that we are able to build our own infrastructure, which are compatible and maybe fit for purpose in our respective economies. So I want to construct where we are going right now, and how it's going to play out as the US gets its own house in order and then tries to influence the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're finding is, look, I mean, Trump was very much focused on his first 100 days, right? So we passed that at the end of April. There were so many executive orders, record level number of executive orders, many of them focused on the financial systems. And as I mentioned, specifically on no longer thinking about regulation by enforcement, but hopefully on some policies that could actually be discussed and debated likely for the first time. I do think that, what happened in the Biden administration, again, for all the reasons he inherited the COVID pandemic, right? That really stalled a lot of what would have been normally a government taking the lead on trying to find the next set of industries where innovation was taking off. There was a very big pause on that during the pandemic, and then you see that in the numbers, right? People were just trying to get to kind of a stabilization and continuity. And I think that's also been part of the challenge. We were talking about this earlier. This is the first time in American history that you have a series of leaders on these 4-year terms. We haven't had that since Bush 41, right? We haven't had a single term president since Bush 41. Now we have multiple single term presidents under different circumstances and under different kind of crises. And unfortunately, the Biden administration was kind of felt like it was put in a position where it couldn't take risks. It couldn't really get out in front of industries or innovation because they were just trying to tread water. They're trying to get back to whatever normal looked like. But what was normal? We will never go back to what is normal. Normalcy right now is kind of uncertainty, right? That is what's normal right now, is the uncertainty. And so that's the challenge, obviously, with innovation, is that you tend to try not to take too many risks. But what I will say is the Trump administration is and will try very, very hard, especially when it comes to financial innovation, to really tap that industry and those series of industries to make sure that there will be opportunities in the payment system, in financial institutions in general, and really think about Silicon Valley not just as a geography, but as a state of mind. That is absolutely the goal, is to bring Silicon Valley to the rest of the country in every way, shape, and form. And look, again, I'm on the board of Ripple, so I support this completely in terms of trying to take those strategic risks that were missing in the previous year.
Here's a question that is designed for you. On the geopolitical front, there's this big question: the future of the dollar as the world's reserve currency, the world's trading currency. In your speech, you mentioned stable coins, and the US has rejected CBDCs. And by the way, the Chinese experiment isn't going anywhere because it's still a pilot. And for some weird reason, the countries that have initiated CBDCs are finding that something about it is not working very well. Okay, do you see that stable coins, and you're the best person to ask this because you're the signature on all the physical notes, that stable coins is the digital version of the US dollar?
I mean, I can speak about it from a factual perspective. And again, this is just kind of my experience being with Ripple. So, I mean, so Ripple recently just launched Ripple USD. Again, I think most folks might have known that. So it's over a $300 million market cap.
That's small.
So yeah, so RLUSD is one of the few stable coins issued under a New York Trust company charter, which again, Ripple is in a position to take that amount of risks. They are doing extremely, extremely well. And we'll be using it, in our own $70 billion kind of flows for these cross-border settlements. So I do think, they are kind of the cutting edge and kind of testing the waters, if you will, especially for cross-border payments. So look, it's something I believe in. It's something that I think is going to happen. And again, I am on the board of Ripple, so I'm seeing kind of how the success, how these deliverables happen. So I believe strongly that stable coins in general will absolutely continue to grow.
And that it will be the backdoor by which the US will digitize.
I think it'll be one of the ways, in a very powerful way.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, in terms of payments infrastructure and regulation of payment infrastructure, where is the U.S. today, given that it's had a couple of false starts during the Biden administration?
Well, and again, look, it's trial and error at this point. I mean, I think we have a Congress now that in this case, we have a president that controls both houses of Congress, and that is what you're going to need in order to pass legislation. There was a lot of fits and starts in previous administrations, even just to have those discussions in Congress. So for me, I mean, look, I'm leading this congressional commission. I know this congressional commission, which is bipartisan, wants to get things done. In fact, I am actually leading what is now the largest congressional caucus on the Hill, which is the America 250 Congressional Caucus. I set out to create the largest congressional caucus, bipartisan, get bicameral, and we are today the largest. So, and by the way, we're almost equally, I think we have now 295 members. We're on track to be the largest in the history of our country, and we're going to reach that before July 4th. That is our goal. And the fact that this congressional caucus is almost exactly represented or distributed half Democrat, half Republican, I think says it all. So I do think you're going to need a Congress that has the right mindset. I think you're going to need a Congress that knows how to pass legislation and then knows how to have these conversations. And from my perspective, absolutely those are conditions that are there.
And the current administration has, taken potshots at the regulatory structure within the U.S. The SEC, in the way in which it handled the nature of digital assets, now its history.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of regulation by enforcement. That's for sure.
And on other fronts, like the current administration's attitude towards open banking, towards the role of consumer protection, where's that going and how's that evolving?
I mean, I think it's still a framework. I think there's still a lot of conversations that haven't happened. I mean, look, we're hardly, what are we, 120 days, maybe 130 days into this administration, so still very, very young. But obviously the will is there. Again, the fact that I've been invited to share the stage with them at the Bitcoin conference in Vegas next week, I think says a lot. So, I mean, I think the fact that the conversations are happening in the first place makes me very, very hopeful that we are heading in the right direction.
Maya, you've been listening to this whole conversation. What I thought that the OJK banking regulator had to share with us was very interesting, because that was the first time I heard a regulator talking about an initial framework for regulating AI. And he talked a lot about governance, and he put the audit element into it. Somehow, it is not yet clear where AI regulation will fall. And here I'm actually continuing from the question I asked Rosie just now, which was, where is the US going in its banking regulation? Because in a lot that has happened in banking regulation around the world, regulators have either fallen on the side of the institutions, or they've fallen on the side of the end user, the consumer. And somehow they've not got that formula right, because to some extent, the existing institutions, the incumbents, have to think about how they're going to reinvent themselves and rebuild a relationship with the end user. At the same time, the end user is becoming more powerful, having more ownership of their own data and control. And then there are all kinds of other issues like privacy and so on. How do you think regulation is playing out from what you've heard this morning, from what you're hearing Rosie say about where the US is today?
I really do not know about US. I think Rosie is much better positioned to answer that. I can only tell you how things are done in Europe and in UK, and I can globally tell you what I think. But first of all, about AI, I think that the regulations, especially on in a broader sense, are premature. Currently, you can see what's happening between the US, China, and Europe. US and China have leadership in all AI, drones, automotive industries, robotics, absolutely everything. Where the Europe is leading are regulations. And the problem is that with these regulations, you actually impede the progress of AI. What is happening further is that both US and China are releasing some of the very, very powerful models in AI. And these models are essential for each and every company in the world to be used and developed further. So if you have the regulations that would actually impede the companies use these models, you are doing a disfavor to your economy. And I think this happened in Europe, unfortunately. So I think one of the things that I would suggest to Indonesia and the whole Asia is not to do the same. On the other side, I believe that AI for banking needs to be very much scrutinized, because all of us, absolutely all of us, trust the banks more than we trust anybody else. All our lives are in those banks. Our money is all our money is in the bank. So really scrutinization of how the AI is used and in which way the AI can protect these monies, as well as maybe some other things like identity of people. And why I talk about identity is because your identity opens your bank account. Like with your identity, you prove that that's you and you can take your money. So that's why this is, at this point, very linked. I think these are important questions, and it's very important that the banks think about it. So the regulations within the banks and scrutinization of the AI that is used, yes, but global regulation of AI in its own right, I don't think that's a good idea.
You know, the interesting thing is about Europe is that the regulation in some ways goes a little ahead of the innovations taking place. Is Europe therefore a laggard in innovation in AI?
There is an ongoing discussion on where Europe is. But if you think about who is delivering the largest progress in the models, that's not Europe. So we can talk about trustworthy AI, and we can talk about responsible AI, but all of these are just some auxiliary points of the basic AI. The basic AI is not developed in Europe. And I think regulations are definitely impeding that. Because if you cannot, how the AI works, how these old models work, when you have the code, you have to train this on a lot of data. And the regulation in Europe says that you cannot do that on any of the data coming from the citizens from Europe. And hence, you cannot prove that actually the data that you are using is not coming from any of the citizens of Europe. Hence, you actually totally impede the use of these large models. And that's a huge problem. And I think in US, and I just spoke to Rosie about that, there are a few states that do the same, but there are very few. There are 3 or 4 states in United States of America that have extreme measures for protection of the citizens. And they claim it is a protection of the citizens, but really they impede also some of the progress. So I think really that at this point, we should not do that. The AI should be free to be developed. But then once you want to apply it in a specific domain, that's where the scrutinization should come in.
Can I just follow up with one thing? So we were talking about this earlier. So the 3 states that were mentioned were Maryland, Illinois, and Texas. All 3 of those are so different, which is interesting, right? And when you think, and you know, this is an administration in general that is very much empowering the states. And so if you leave it to the states and you have those 3 case studies, I can't think of more different states than those 3, yet they agree.
So in principle, yes, where everybody is, right? All the headquarters are in California. But nonetheless, what is important is what I said. None of these states really impedes the development of the models. But yes, if you want to use like the targeting of the people like Meta was doing previously and so on. So in principle, I think it's a very important to distinguish between development of the basic models and the applications. And I think this is something which has not been done very well in Europe. The problem is that in Europe, they did these blanket rules. So let's not use the data, the AI for anything like, for example, understanding of human behavior. However, understanding of human behavior has amazing, tremendous, positive use cases, such as, for example, helping of autistic children. This is something I was working on, or helping clinicians do some predictions about and diagnose some of the additional cues regarding the diseases. But all of this is now impossible in Europe because it is a blanket rule. You cannot use it for human behavior analysis, for example. So it's extremely important to think about these regulations. We should not use these blanket rules, and we should really separate between development of the basic models and applications.
You know, the same question I asked Maya, which was, you know, whether regulation was going ahead of innovation in Europe. If I were to translate that question in the US, and Rosie, you said jobs. You sounded like a central banker, you know. And if you're going to be a central banker, the other element in there is productivity. And you also said one of the goals in your in the programs that you worked on was mobilizing private capital at scale. What is the conversation in the US about jobs, productivity, and personal rights in a country where both on the financial services front and on the AI front, the administration is tilting towards big business, you know, towards the supply side, towards the institutions rather than to the end user. So what's the feedback that's coming from the ground up?
I would actually say that the empowerment of the end user is a big priority. Absolutely. And that's the thing. And the way I want to think about what you're saying and kind of what you're saying, when you think about who the end user is for innovation, it's going to be, you know, the Gen Z and the, you know, the post millennials, right? In terms of how things are going to change, in my opinion, you know, so they don't see privacy in the same way that we see privacy, right? And for them, it's also, you know, there's this whole movement of where the individual empowerment is kind of coming back in a very unique way. And it is, you know, again, it's also the evolution of technology, access to the internet. It's what these kids see. It's no longer what they're taught at home or taught in the classroom, right? It's what they see. So I do think, actually, these conversations about empowering the individuals are going to be very, very important. And I do think it is going to be, again, in my opinion, if you want to know the future, you got to look at millennials and post-millennials.
I also would like to mention exactly what Rosie is saying. So millennials, I'm a millennial. I'm way too old to talk about how
Millennials are old.
No, but how my kid, for example, will use the technology and consume the content and so on. Really, it is extremely important to think, to bring these new minds inside of the discussion. So I really think it's important to be aware of ourselves. And so who these people who are currently leading are coming from. So
I also think consumer behavior is going to change drastically because of that. So there's a difference between human behavior and consumer behavior. And what we learned from, you know, from the advent of the mass scale use of social media and kind of how we think about our purchases in general and what the pandemic did to accelerate the use of online commerce. Boy, consumer behavior has changed drastically, where I don't think anyone predicted what was going to happen and how it was going to happen. So I do think, and I'm going to go back to this, if you want to know the future, look at this next generation of, you know, 18 to 22-year-olds, college-age kids today. That is the future. Consumer, political, economic, social, etc.
Well, then let me ask you one thing. We have, I'm also European, in Europe, a great advantage that all the regulations have to be approved by 27 members. This means that 27 administrations have an opinion, each of which have several political parties. The outcome tends to be a very solid consensus of what is right and wrong. In the United States, you have two parties with a number of factions in the party, and at the moment you have a single leader. The question is, do you think that bureaucracy-led innovation and regulation ultimately can survive? Because in America became famous for firefighting, not for bureaucracy-led innovation. So there seems to be a shift. Do you think that that is a good thing, or is that sustainable?
You know, I know where I think the shift is going. I think the shift is going to be going in more of an apolitical approach.
Yeah.
So, and this is the way I see the world. I mean, look, I'm a Democrat, but I'm fiscally conservative. I'm one of 9 kids, by the way. 4 of my siblings are Democrat, 4 of my siblings are Republican, and I'm the only one that's fiscally conservative but socially liberal. I absolutely believe that that is the future. And if you look at how the election happened, in terms of people didn't stay in their boxes, right? Some people might say that Trump actually won the election with the African American and Latino vote, which normally wouldn't have been, you know, a D versus an R. And I absolutely believe, especially with this next generation, that they don't have the same borders, boxes, and boundaries. They don't want to check those boxes in the same way that my generation has forced those boxes. So I think it's the media that skews a lot of this, in my opinion. I'm not a big fan of the media in general and how it does want to put these extremes at the forefront. These extremes are not the majority, and they haven't been the majority. And I do think you're going to find a more centrist view of the world evolving from all of this.
I think one of the things that is really important is innovation. You say whether, you know, that there is a shift in innovation. I don't see any shift. America is leading innovation. China is leading innovation. UK is leading innovation. All these countries are more or less parties, right? So there are 2 parties. So I think what happened in Europe is exactly because there are so many parties, so many countries. What do? Most conservative approach. Let's just shut it all. I don't think that's a way forward. And I really think politics should totally be out of any innovation, right? Because innovation should serve everybody, each and every individual in this room, each and every individual in this world, independently of political, religious, or whatever other orientations.
But of course, this would argue that the act, like the Genius Act or certain other legislation, should actually, people should wait for that until it is clear where the direction is. Because, as you say, it is much an impediment as
Let's not assume there's going to be resolution up front, right? Again, the way that we are set up is to have those debates, those dialogues that goes from one house to the other. We have both chambers of commerce, or both chambers of Congress. So again, the fact that it's even happening and the fact that these conversations are even just starting is just the beginning. I mean, we're not going to get to solution overnight, nor did we get here overnight. It's going to take some time, and it should take some time.
And coming from you, that's very instructive because we're all looking at everything that's happening in the US from far away. Now, having both these key speakers up on stage, and it's wonderful that for the first time we have 2 ladies as the keynote speakers. We should thank them for that. Is a precursor for the conversations that are going to be going on in the rest of this conference. And one of the big topics that we are trying to tackle is what is the future of digital assets for the banking industry, especially at a time when there are already native digital asset players out there in the marketplace. And next week you are going to be at Bitcoin. You're going to see a lot of the native digital assets. You didn't speak very much about digital assets in your presentation. What's your take on that, and where do you think that's going?
Oh, I think it's very promising across the board. I remain very, very hopeful. And I mean, look, I mean, even how we think about the word banking and financial institutions is kind of turning itself, right? It's really, it's a whole new page that I don't think we've ever confronted before. And I think it's happening in a very healthy way.
Yeah, and Maya will be will be the key speaker for the closing keynote tomorrow, where she'll have the whole stage to talk about where AI is taking the banking industry, and especially today that she has left the platform players and joined the banks themselves, and a whole range of issues in there on governance, on safety, on cybersecurity that we'd like to drill down with Maya tomorrow. And so I will ask my erstwhile friend to give us our conclusion right now.
Good. Well, thank you very much. The beginning, we heard how well our host country, Indonesia, is doing. So that's always good to hear. And then we heard from the regulator about an approach, which is very much a regulation-driven approach with an array of amazing regulations that most of us, I think I can say, don't know exist. And they are very thoughtful and thought through. We then had a great presentation on firefighting, and as we know that America is very good at firefighting. So if we look to the future, and then we have, of course, I think it's always the middle ground, Europe. Somehow in the middle ground, particularly the UK, they are sort of on the fringes, but in the middle ground, and part of that, and now we have a New Deal, and so it's going to be closer, further away. So in Europe, we tend to be also more regulation-driven, and the European Union drives the business frameworks and environment through legislation, and a few thousand pages a year, a bit like in America. I think what we really heard is that, and maybe that's a bit too optimistic, that governments increasingly are retracting to a position to protect the people who need protection. That's the consumer, the players, the system. And increasingly trying to foster only innovation and development. It's a bit like horses being given a little bit more leeway to run around and less constraints. That will mean that in the same way that Bretton Woods was abandoned with the gold standard and the US dollar became the global standard, that innovations like crypto assets, stablecoins, variations, we're not yet there, will tacitly overtake, that's what they hear, the majority of the financial system. And if that's the case, everybody here should be ready to deal with that and to do business. So I see that as a fundamental shift from a traditional system with whistles and bells to a fundamentally different system that we haven't yet fully understood. And for us to understand that, we have to spend 2 days at this conference and listen to very, very intelligent people. And I think after 2 days, we're going to be a little bit smarter, still ignorant, but a higher level of ignorance. So that is what I learned from this morning.
Look, everything's an opportunity. I see this as a tremendous opportunity to pivot, retool, prepare, and launch. Absolutely. Huge opportunity.
And I think that gives us a perspective on how to make sense of all of the regulatory efforts taking place around the world, and why the US approach, while seeming very messy, does have its way of finding a way along, in history. We saw that with the gold standard, and now we are seeing that in the digital economy.
In the words of Warren Buffett, I will always bet on America. Always.
Actually, on that front, the one question I had for Rosie was, the US dollar and the Treasury used to be the instruments for flight for safety right up to the 2008 crisis. It wasn't this time, and that's sort of telling.
Different conditions, completely unprecedented conditions today. That's for sure. We're still finding our way.
And we now live in a world which is multifaceted, with many different innovations taking place that we were not able to capture on the stage. But thank you, both of you, for this amazing opening session.
Thank you. Thank you.